European context in this is central, and I must go into that for a moment. Across the water in Gaul, Aetius, a general who was trying to beat some order out of it, was doing rather well. And it's at this point, as he does this, that we begin to win some successes against the Saxons. And this could be the time of Arthur, King Arthur, but Gildas does not mention King Arthur. Aetius had sent Germanus and not an army, because he was dealing with Attila the Hun and beating the Visigoths into submission, smoothing out Gaul and incorporating it back into the empire. The Western Empire in the 450s and 460s momentarily regained much of Iberia and Gaul from these barbarians and began a brief resurgence, and it looked like this would incorporate Britain back into the empire as well. Pottery, Mediterranean pottery, begins to reflow back into Britain, and styles begin to re-echo Roman styles in Britain. There's a resurgence of Roman culture in the British and newly Welsh-speaking areas. We're calling ourselves Romans again. Emperor Majorian won many victories in Gaul, along with his generals. Anthemius defeated the Visigoths in 467, which is very important for re-establishing links between Rome and Britain. And the Britons in Amorica, under Euthymus, who has been suggested as King Arthur before, led them to great victories in Brittany, present-day Brittany, and much of France, to defeat those tribes there and re-establish a Roman peace, briefly. And due to this peace, large groups of Britons began migrating from south-central Britain into Brittany, and not until 496, Soissons, near Paris, was the last enclave of the Western Roman Empire in Gaul extinguished by the incoming Franks. But that date certainly severs any hope of us in Britain restoring our links with the glory of the Roman Empire, which we felt to be our rightful inheritance and important for military stability. This settlement in Brittany is very important because the early church was very focused around this western waterway, and early saints like Gildas began traveling between them, like Cubbie, who gives the name Caragaby off the coast of Ynys He was Cornish, actually, and many of our saints traveled back and forth from Wales and Brittany. The evidence of Germanic settlement after this period in the mid-5th century is extensive, and what's striking is where they are, because you have Jutes here, you have Saxon here, and then you have Angles here. So we weren't faced with one enemy, keeping in mind we had Picts to the north and Irish to the west, which we were dealing with at the same time. But in the east, where these peoples are, match brooches, a type of ornament to hold a cape, which are found directly corresponding to lands in Frisia, Jutland, Saxony, where they came from. So we know that these peoples moved, or at least these styles were imitated, corresponding to these Germanic tribes in Britain along these territories. And they founded new kingdoms along these lines. There appears also at this time to be numerous civil wars between Romano-Britons and Britons further west, so that we were fighting ourselves at the very moment that these Anglo-Saxon tribes came into our inheritance of empire. But a Britain remained, and these emerging kings focused on the old Commonwealth and civitases of the Roman Empire, and they began to push back against these Saxons. But new migrations were taking place further up the east coast into Britain, and key battles were beginning to tilt against us. Gildas names Ambrosius Aurelius, we call him Emrys Oledig, who donned the imperial purple and led battles to a few victories over these Saxons, so there was hope breaching through this harsh, horrible time. In due course, he became a figurehead, a major player, a character in Welsh legendary tradition, who many would trace their genealogy and heritage back to, this last British Roman general. This Emrys Oledig, or Ambrosius Aurelius, may have been the one who led us to a great victory at present-day Caerfaddon, Bath, Mynydd Badon Mountain, which halted the tide for about 50 years and established some sense of breathing space. Both Ambrosius and Rhyddamus are very good contenders for being King Arthur, and it certainly was this age which shaped that initial idea, although only by the 9th century do we really have true references, vague ones, to this legendary hero. So maybe he was more than one person, and that was an epithet, a given title name. Arthur. That sounds a bit like bear man to me. Arth Gur. Early British rulers in Gwent, Morgannwg, even in Digonwy up north, and the Dematai becoming Divad, they are clearly, in their archaeology we find they're clearly imitating Roman ways, like the decidedly Romano-British monastery at Llanilltyd, for whom many rulers received their own training, via Latin most likely, rather than Welsh, though Welsh certainly, as you will see in later episode, became the language of law later. However, after Gildas, the curtain comes down, and from the late 6th century, these Anglo-Saxon tribes begin forming into kingdoms and re-advancing toward the west, and we, this time, unlike the first and second pushes, are not able to fully stop them. In 577, quite a brutal blow was inflicted upon us by these Western Saxons. They launched a surprise attack, it seems, near present-day Bath, Durham, in 577. 3 British kings of the region were killed in one swoop, and the most prosperous and wealthy province of Britons, potentially the most successful that we had, was lost forever. From that point, Wales and Cornwall were separated from one another, and we never truly recovered in the southwest from this brutal blow that we lost what, in my mind, Bath, Gloucester, this region would have been the heartland of our nation. This would have been where the capital of our people grew. This was like the French losing Paris. The heart ripped out of our country and annexed into another. How could you properly recover, even psychologically, from losing what would have been the heartland of your nation? And eventually Mercia arises and does something that no one of these Germanic peoples has done to this point. They begin expressing imperial ambitions, using greater titles that belonged to us, and taking it and crowning themselves with it. And I say that this is possible only because Mercia, large swathes of it were clearly majority Welsh-speaking. Anglo-Saxon law clearly has place within its hierarchies for large sections of the population which are British and later Welsh-speaking, to slowly assimilate them. But as we move west, up into the river, Havren, Severn and Gwy, and Trenon, Trent, we begin to get more and more Celtic, and eventually they're not able to fully assimilate us, and we begin fighting back enough to hold our ground, and that's where we get Offa's Dyke. From the Yorkshire upland bits down to Southampton, along a line to the east, there's not much British remnants of names that have survived, but west of it, you immediately get more and more. This shows that line where we did stop them and hold for a while and regather our strength, so that when they pushed forward again, we were able to break up into kingdoms that were strong enough to hold back this new advance. And by the end of the 5th century, going into the 600s, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, these begin forming, and ironically they form us, because they mark off land where we're not able to expand into. And this is what gives us the shape of Wales, not the natural contours of the land itself, because the river Havren would naturally be our border. That makes the most sense, but it's not today. We were defined by these invaders as we became Welsh. Coming out of this rupture, this anarchic blooming that we suffered, and those new Saxon kingdoms to the east walling us off into ourselves, the next video is truly us coming into ourselves, understanding we are Welsh now. But what is that? We had to reawaken something in ourselves to define that. And that is what the next video is about next time. If you've made it this far, please consider joining me on Patreon, on the screen now. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to each and every one of you who do contribute. You are making this possible. And I'll put a link below for you. And I thank you very much for watching. Diolch yn fawr. Hwyl fawr.